Hello everyone, and welcome to another video in my IT customer support series. And in this lesson, I'm doing a video tutorial over end user needs assessment projects. Now, this is going to just talk about how to create a project to analyze our end user technology needs. So the first part of this lesson is going to break this type of project into 9 specific steps and providing a general overview of each of those steps. Next, we'll learn about some common tools that are used in this type of project and the project management methods and tools that are used to manage these type of projects. Let's go ahead and take a look at what all areas we're going to cover in this video. These are the basic areas of topics during this video lesson: basic strategies for performing end user needs analysis and assessment, steps analysts are going to undertake to analyze and assess our user needs, the common tools that help support specialists to conduct a user needs assessment project. Then we'll talk about tasks in managing a user needs assessment project. Then we'll conclude with project management software tools that are out there and available. First of all, let's talk about the basic strategies for performing end user needs analysis and assessment. So basically, a needs assessment project is just a sequence of steps that we follow that are designed to obtain relevant information from our end users or our customers and help those individuals make an informed decision about their technology purchases or processing procedures. So we as support analysts help our end users to choose both the hardware or software products that best fit their needs. So let's go ahead and take a look at those steps now, and I'll go through all 9 of those steps. Here are those steps. The first step is to understand the end users and the organization's goals. We need to ask ourselves, what is the environment into which the future system is going to fit into? What are the goals of the organization? What are the goals of the department, or even the goals of the specific users? What type of organization is it? Is it a for-profit or not-for-profit organization? What is the level of the expertise of the staff that this system will be implemented into? What about the budget for technology products and services? What's the overall attitude about technology? Are they going to be willing to adapt to new technologies? So we need to have a clear understanding of not only our end user needs, but the organization as a whole. What are the organizational goals that we must overcome? So there are obviously lots of questions that should be asked and answered. So make sure you have a clear understanding before you move on to that next step, step 2, which is understanding the decision criteria and constraints. And there are some questions you should ask at this step 2 to understand the decision criteria and constraints, like which criteria will impact the overall final decision, or is this project even feasible? And one way we do this is to perform a feasibility study. And a feasibility study is simply going to investigate the constraints and that impact a project, such as an economic feasibility, which are our budget constraints. Operational feasibility, this is the impact on other technologies and personnel. The technological feasibility, this is that state of the current technology in our organization. And then the timeline feasibility. These are, as it sounds, those time constraints. As we move on to step 3, this is where we define the problem clearly. Question that we should ask is, what is the real problem that needs to be solved by performing this project? It is extremely important to properly define the problem and get to the root cause before giving any type of suggestions to a solution. Ask lots of probing questions, because not all the questions that need to be answered are going to be technical. Some of the problems are just going to be organizational, such as the workflow process, or maybe it's training, maybe it's the actual personnel, maybe there's some politics involved that's is the root cause of our problem. Don't assume that a user has correctly analyzed the problem. Ask lots of probing questions. Also in this step, you need to observe the user in their environment. And then lastly, consider solutions other than just the obvious ones. Don't take that low-hanging fruit if that's not really going to solve the problem. Then we'll move into step 4, which is to identify the roles of our stakeholders. And the stakeholders are those people or individuals that are going to be impacted by the project. By definition, a stakeholder is just some participant in a needs analysis project who might gain or who might lose from the success or failure of the project. Anyone who can be impacted is a stakeholder. There are different kinds of stakeholders, such as end users, the managers, the technical support staff or the IT staff, as well as support analysts. Perhaps you need to ask yourself, can vendors be stakeholders in a project? If there is some role that they are directly impacted, then of course they are a stakeholder. Step 5 is the step to identify sources of information. Ask yourself, which sources of information are needed to analyze the user needs? Perhaps we need to do interviews with the users and the managers. Maybe using surveys or questionnaires to be completed by our users, using different resources. Maybe you have some web resources to use, such as SurveyMonkey, that you can send out surveys and get those. It'll be a little bit more unbiased because they don't feel like they're turning into their manager. So this is one way to get those information from your users. You also need to do some direct observation of the existing situation. Maybe there are some reports that you can see that have been created from the existing system. Look at different diagrams or workflows, equipment inventories. Perhaps there's already some recommendations from consultants, vendors, or even some auditors. So look for different sources of information so that you can help analyze those user needs. Next, we'll go into step 6, which is to develop an understanding of our existing technology. How does the current system or the existing system work? Maybe a model can use it, which is just a narrative description, or maybe even a graphic diagram that represents a business activity, the network, the way computer systems work, whatever the case may be. See if you can create a model or if one exists. Because a model can aid an analyst's understanding of that existing system. And it can be shared with stakeholders to verify your understanding of the existing system. Next, we'll take a look at step 7, which is to investigate alternatives to that existing technology in the organization. Maybe the existing system can be fixed. Maybe you need to add resources or change the resources. Or maybe there's even the ability to upgrade that existing system. Upgrades can do such things such as improving, let's say, the capacity of the system or the compatibility. Maybe with an upgrade, you'll find that there are some new features that address those identified problems that have been the reason for having this project to begin with. Sometimes you have to look at new hardware alternatives. This can resolve different constraints. Perhaps a new system will help resolve any issues you had with storage constraints or new software not being compatible with an older system. So there's different reasons that a new hardware alternative is what's needed. And then alternatively, there are new software alternatives that could meet the needs of the customers to do such things such as increase their productivity or expand the opportunities that are available to the organization. Step 8 is to develop a model of the proposed solution. And then when you're doing that, when you're developing that, think about what features would the new technology or that new solution offer. So build a model of the proposed system or solution and include the pros and cons of each of the alternatives that you come up with in that modeling. There's different kinds. There's really two types of solutions. There's the optimal solution. This is the best solution that is out there. And then there's the satisficing solution, which is not, really the optimal solution, but it solves the problem. It's not necessarily the best solution, but it is an alternative and can, meet the needs of the customers. When we're doing this, we need to do a cost-benefit analysis. And this is just a comparison between the expenses and the payoffs to the organization based on a solution. You can analyze the solution with the pros and cons, or you can compare the solutions against each other. Because a cost-benefit analysis is not necessarily an exact science with right or wrong answers, but it is a way to compare the solution's expenses. And are the expenses greater than the payoffs, or the payoffs greater than the expenses? You need to know that when you are making an informed decision. And then lastly, step 9 is the make a build versus the buy decision. Should the new technology or solution be built, or should it be purchased? So this is where you come up with that build versus buy decision. A decision to build a custom solution or purchase an off-the-shelf solution. So this is where we build rather than buy. And this applies primarily to software. It can apply to some of the hardware, but primarily to the software. You might hear the term used in the industry called a turnkey system. This is just an integrated package solution that provides hardware, software, and support services from a single vendor, and when it gets put in, it's ready to go. There are pros and cons to both building a custom solution or buying an off-the-shelf solution. Obviously, one of the pros to buying an off-the-shelf system is its faster implementation. It's going to have better documentation already available to you, and usually you're going to find out there are fewer bugs than when someone tries to build one. But building a custom solution, systems may provide strategic business advantages over competitors because it is a custom solution, and it's not everyone doesn't have all of these features that you might have. So it just depends on your organization and your cost benefit analysis, all that, as to which choice you go with. Now let's move on to talk about common tools that help support specialists to conduct a user needs assessment project. We'll go over some of those tools now, such as a product charter, cost benefit analysis, which I currently mentioned, data collection instruments, charts and diagrams, prototyping software, and project management software. Now, a project charter is just a short narrative statement that describes the objectives, the scope, the various methods, the participants, the deliverables, the overall timeline, and defines the project success. This is going to provide you a high-level overview of a project. It's going to promote a common understanding amongst all your stakeholders about the project. You'll have to have deliverables in there, which is just the end result of a needs analysis project, such as the analysis of alternatives, the feasibility report I mentioned earlier, your recommendations, and that build versus buy decision. These are all going to be part of that charter, so make sure to include all of that in your narrative statement. The project charter is simply going to address a lot of things, like what are the objectives of the project, what's going to be achieved through this project, what's the scope, what's not in the scope, who are all your participants, how will the success be measured, what's the project timeline, what are the major project steps that are going to be involved. So there's a lot of questions, and it's very detailed. You can find examples of project charters out there on the internet. Now, I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk about it again, is the cost benefit analysis. This is just a tool to help identify the costs and its corresponding benefits of some type of solution. It's simply going to compare and weigh the benefits of each alternative solution to the costs of each alternative. Generally, this can be done in a side-by-side comparison, and someone will call this a balance sheet. But the cost-benefit analysis is going to help us as analysts compare all the alternative solutions. Some of the categories that you will see in this are acquisition costs and operating costs. Operating costs are those things that are ongoing, continuing costs to operate that technology. Acquisition costs, just how it sounds, it's the initial cost to build or buy that technology. When it comes to the benefits, there's categories of the benefits. Those tangible benefits that are relatively easy to quantify, such as your expenses, or, that have been reduced, or in turn, it might increase the revenue opportunities that you have as an organization. So on the other side of tangible benefits are obviously the intangible benefits. And these are those expected results from a project that are difficult to find a way to quantify or to measure them. An example of an intangible benefit might be like an improved service to the clients. Well, it's not there yet, so it's hard to measure that. Or higher employee morale. Well, it's hard to measure morale. There are some ways that you might find that people try to say they do it, but to actually measure morale is difficult, but that would be an intangible benefit. Maybe even the ability to take advantage of new technology. Well, you can't really measure that, but you have an opportunity, that ability to take advantage of something new. So that's an intangible benefit. In your cost benefit analysis, one other area that you're always going to make sure to look at is the payback period. This is that amount of time that's going to take for a project's benefits to exceed the amount of costs that went into this. So you'll need to define what that payback period is. Your stakeholders are definitely going to know that information. All right, data collection instruments. These are such things as how we're going to collect data. Such things as input forms, output forms, procedural documentation, operation or problem logs, once again, interviews and questionnaires, as well as simply direct observation. Now, an input form is just a document, whether it be paper or electronic, that's used to collect information about a business transaction. Sometimes we call this a source document. Payroll time cards, problem logs, expense account records, these are all examples of input forms. So I know that might be a different type of term, but that is the term we use. An output form are documents that contain the results of some type of business transaction or process. Once again, like a paycheck stub. This is the output. You worked hours at X amount of pay. The output of that is your paycheck stub. Or what might be more in tune is a grade report. You have the classes you took, you get the grades that resulted from the effort you put into the course. That is an output form. Procedural documentation are those written instructions about how to perform a business transaction or handle some type of routine business process. If you've ever worked in a new organization as a new employee, then you've probably come across procedural documentation to help you get trained. Operating or problem logs. A log is just a list of events or activities that are recorded in the sequence of the events that occurred, that are routine, maybe some type of periodic event information. That information is captured. During a system boot up, there is a log that's created of all the events and any type of errors that occurred during that period. And then interviews and questionnaires. This is, one simple way of collecting relevant information from the actual users. There's advantages and disadvantages of either interviews or questionnaires. An advantage, as an example, with your interview is that you can probe to learn details of issues that are of special interest. But if you use a questionnaire, an advantage of this is, you have the ability to survey a large group of users at a low cost. Unfortunately, with the questionnaire, sometimes it's difficult to phase those unambiguous questions. And with direct observation, we're simply watching the users do the work. And you can find out a lot of information doing that this way. We can take notes on what the users are doing, their actual sequence of steps, and what tools and strategies they use. So it's a lot of information can be captured through direct observation. And then charts and diagrams can be used to show, the flow of information, relationships between workers, parts of an information system, or the network of devices that are attached to the network. These are often easier to read and understand than a lengthy, very technical narrative, because it's in a different way that's much more appealing to us to be able to evaluate. One example here is a flowchart. You've probably come across flowcharts, and one way to just think about a flowchart is it's a very schematic diagram that uses various symbols to represent parts of the system or the steps in a given procedure. And when you're doing project management and you're working with flowcharts, there are certain items that represent different things, such as a diamond. It's almost always a decision point at which you can make a yes or no response from, and then you can branch off from that to look at different options. So, if you've never come across a flowchart, it's good to look at that. And there's different software that can help you build flowcharts that are very necessary. An IPO chart, this is another one that we come across and is very useful here. And it's just a diagram that represents your input, which is your I, your processing, which is your P, and the output, which is your O. So you see what's going in, how it's being processed, and what are the results. And so there are really three fundamental questions about a procedure that can be answered with an IPO chart. What information do I need to perform a task? This is your input. For your processing, what tasks do I perform to process or transform that information? And lastly, your output, what results are produced when I am finished? So make sure you know or have good understanding of the IPO chart. Now we'll talk about those tasks in managing a user needs assessment project. Help desk agents are normally going to perform primarily routine operational tasks, but sometimes we get brought into special projects. And I call it a special project because these are support tasks that do not normally occur on a regular basis. Some of the characteristics to help identify a special project are the steps and procedures are not well defined. They usually take longer to accomplish because they're not a routine operational task, and they're often more complex than those routine support tasks. An example of a special project might be, I've mentioned this a couple times before, but with end-user documentation, developing that end-user documentation, or even conducting training sessions. This is not part of your normal tasks. Or maybe you're going to plan and implement a new training program. Once again, out of those regular routine daily tasks. But this is where project management comes into play. And there are 5 steps generally in a basic look at project management. And these 5 steps are: step 1 is going to be your project definition. Step 2 is going to be your project planning. Once you've got it planned out, you're going to move into step 3, which is the project implementation. Once it's been implemented, you'll go into step 4, which is project monitoring. And step 5 is project termination. Step 1 in project management, the project definition, is where we're going to define the project scope. We're going to say what the goals are, those objectives and outcomes. We're going to give a tentative calendar of our due dates and those timelines we're going to follow. Then we're going to estimate a tentative budget. We're going to list out who all of our primary stakeholders are, and then we're going to define who our project manager is, that leader of this project. When it comes to its project goals, these are very specific, measurable results, and that is we're going to be held accountable to those goals. These are the deliverables from completing this project. When we got that completed, we'll move into step 2, the project planning. And we're going to have some project tasks here. We're going to list, these are specific actions or objectives that must be performed to reach our overall goals. The purpose of these is to divide our large project into much smaller tasks to be completed. We should be able to estimate a time for each task so we have that schedule to follow. And we should, at this step, assign the resources to the tasks. A project plan, I've mentioned that. This is just a document that describes the project tasks, our available resources, our timeline, and our costs. In our project plan, we should be able to answer various questions such as which tasks will be completed, who's going to perform each task, how long will each task take, and what resources will be needed to complete each of those required tasks. There are some risk factors we want to identify here, and these are, when I say risk factors, they simply identify and evaluate problems that can arise during the life of a project. And there's certain things that can be anticipated or unanticipated. If we have a schedule that's not developed well, that's obviously a risk factor we're going to come across. An unanticipated thing might be perhaps we've got people that don't have the skills that are needed, or maybe there are some conflicts that arise amongst our stakeholders. So that could be an unanticipated event that we come across. In project implementation, which is step 3, this is where the work proceeds on each task or objective according to the task assignments that we created and the schedule in our project plan. The project manager their focus is going to shift from planning to coordination. We've already got a plan. Now we need to coordinate the events to implement this solution. And then our project manager is going to work on resolving problems and conflicts that arise. When you're implementing a new system, you need to look at different ways of implementing. There's different strategies that are involved. You could do a direct conversion. This is where you terminate that existing technology when your new solution becomes operational. This is risky, and some people do it. It's probably not best practice because of the fallouts that can occur. One that's probably used more is the parallel conversion. This is where you operate both your old and your new technologies to increase confidence in the new solution. Therefore, if problems happen, you still have your existing solution, the old solution, that is there as well. Obviously, this is more burden on those, the end users that are using the systems, but it helps you have any type of downtime because of the new system, where if you completely switch over as in a direct conversion, you run the risk of downtime in your organization. There's also phase implementation as an implementation strategy. This is where some of the workload is removed from the existing technology in various stages as you introduce that new solution. And then there's the pilot project implementation strategy. This is where new technology is implemented in a few selected situations to gain confidence before some type of corporation-wide or industry-wide implementation. Then step 4 is the project monitoring. This just involves ongoing assessment of project tasks to determine, how much work has been accomplished so far, how much work still remains to be done, how will changes in the task impact project completion dates. Adding more staff to a task or a project doesn't necessarily get it done faster or even better. Sometimes you might risk scope creep here in your project monitoring. And scope creep is just the tendency for a project to grow or change in unexpected ways. Perhaps like it exceeds the budget, or you need additional staff or equipment you didn't plan for. This is scope creep. And step 5 is project termination. This is the final step in project management, in which the completion is communicated to all of your stakeholders. You complete that final project report, and you look at the performance of the project and the participants, and then evaluate those. So some of the things you might ask yourself is, how well did the project team members function together as a group? Or what did we learn from this project that will help us manage future projects? There's different tools that we can have access to, such as Microsoft Project or Cadasa Software Milestone Simplicity, KIDASA Software's Milestone Simplicity. You'll hear the term milestones used in some realms in software development lifecycle or project management. Gantt charts. These are just a project planning tool that displays basic information about each project task as a horizontal bar on a timeline. Gantt charts are used all the time because it's an easy visual. There is a critical path management tool. This is a sequence of project tasks that must be completed on time to meet a project's completion date. You can find out all kinds of project management tools and examples out on the internet. But trust me, you will find out that Microsoft Project is one of the top tools along with Gantt charts. And you can find easy to download Gantt charts that you can incorporate into Microsoft Excel for examples. Well, that is it for this lesson on end user needs assessment projects. Thank you for following along. I hope you found the information helpful and that you go out there and maybe do some additional research and look at project management as well. Look at maybe getting a project management certification such as the CompTIA the CompTIA Project Plus or PMP or some of those various project management certifications that will help you get those jobs or become better project managers. But as we look at the root of it all begins with what are our end user needs. So make sure you can assess those before moving into big projects. Thank you for following along, everyone. Have a great day.